So I will just start with a brief introduction. Um, I think everybody knows me, Karen from Any 360 Fitness, and I really specialize in coaching companies and individuals to achieve their goals, no matter what they are. And I like to take a comprehensive approach. And so when I met Lee, who's with us today from Pathways Navigation, we really just met a couple months ago. Really, it's kind of a new friendship. But I really liked the perspective that he brought when I met him, and we were able to connect together and talk, like learn more about what each other does. And I thought it would be great to invite him to a webinar. I like to do these on a regularly, not so regular basis. And so today we're going to talk about preparing for change, which, change is the only constant in our world. There's always something that comes up. And in one of our initial conversations, Lee mentioned something about not allowing anxiety to drive the bus during certain situations. And that really resonated with me. And it was like, okay, we've got to talk more about this, because we are, I hate to say, in the middle of a pandemic, and I hate to keep saying that we were even in a pandemic, but it's true. We're, I think, on our way out of it, but there is even more change coming. And as people are shifting back into work or realizing that they're going to be remote for longer than they expected, or they're realizing school's almost out if their kids have been in school, we still have this sort of influx of change going on. And so I don't feel I can give you a proper introduction because we're still such new friends. But if you don't mind introducing yourself and just kind of giving a brief background, and then from there we can dive into the topics underneath what this is really all about.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. It is a new friendship and of like-minded folks. So Karen talks about coaching and progression, with a physical foundation, that it starts with what are you doing with your body and where you're going. In my case, I've spent 25 years or more as a project manager in the financial services industry. And that came after going to school in a pre-med curriculum where I ended up focusing on animal behavior at the tail end. But I took a big left turn to go into the business world because I thought I needed to make some money. And that drove me into an arena that was new and different. I hadn't been prepared for it. I could talk to you about kinesiology, physiology, talk about some of the comparisons of muscles between a necturus and a shark and a cat, but I couldn't tell you what the difference was between accounting and marketing, other than accounting must have done something with numbers, and marketing, I didn't even know what that was. Here I am years later in a role as a coach where I am working with mid-career professionals as they seek what they want to do next, when they want to take control of their direction. Most of the people that I work with stepped into their job because it was the best available at the time. So for most of their career, like myself, we learned how to make lemonade, and we took the options that were present and worked with them. I now help people set up the options they get to choose from so that they're actually operating in a world, in a direction that actually is fulfilling. For today's conversation, change is an element that's present even before the pandemic. The pandemic didn't introduce change into our lives. Doing our jobs, we're faced with change, and we polish our jobs by dealing with change in a managed way. We anticipate what the questions are going to be from our manager, from our clients, what the competitors might be doing, and we try to manage that to keep things from changing. When we get introduced to things like the pandemic, that just threw everything to the wind. Where we went to work, what we did, how we interact with people, that I was so comfortable being next to somebody, being 6 feet away felt strange. It felt like I was being rude. I had to retrain myself that this is now a normal distance. This is not unfriendly. They are not being unfriendly to me. So around change, it's always happening to us. And in the pandemic or in this stage, we're all affected, but we're not affected the same way. What the common things with change are, it usually is bringing to the presence what we don't know or what we haven't anticipated. What that often means is I now have to react to something and I've got to figure it out relatively quickly. Our body is not smart enough to differentiate the saber-toothed tiger standing in front of me and the person with a mask on. Both elicit a fear reaction, a tension. And that tension drives even into our mind to simplify. It's to decide quickly, do I run? Do I fight? What do I do? And I'm using these very primitive terms, but in essence, that's what the anxiety or change elicits initially. The way to get around that is to learn, am I getting agitated? What do I do there? So today's conversation is going to be about what do we do when change appears and what do we do in the face of change? So that's some of the background, Garen.
I love it. And I think that's a really good segue for like how I wanted to dive into things because and excuse me, I've got my notes here, quite a few of them. Most everybody knows I'm still a pen and paper kind of gal. So we've learned over the last year that, people who have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression have experienced a higher intensity of symptoms or feelings. We've also learned that people that have never been diagnosed with anxiety or depression are all of a sudden feeling some form of these symptoms and feelings. And I think at first it's hard for people to understand what that feeling is. And awareness, I think, is really important. And that's something that I usually try to help people with when I'm coaching from a fitness and nutrition perspective, right? So the analogy I use is you go to the mall, or you used to go to the mall, and maybe you do now. And you want to find a store. And so you look at the map and you know that that store is there. And I relate that to a person's goal. They come to me and they say, I want to do this. I want to run faster. I want to lose weight. Okay. Well, we can look at that, but we have to start by the ever popular, you are here. And you can't get there unless we know where you're starting from. And I think that awareness is a really big part of that. So I was hoping we could break down, because this is a lot of employees that sign on to these and that I work with, and that's kind of the change we're focusing on. Although I think that this will relate to even home life. Our family, we have family members who are sick or also transitioning. So internally and externally, can you talk about things that people can be aware of? Like, I almost think let's start externally. So when you go to work, what are some things that people can be aware of that could drive those feelings of anxiousness or nervousness? And then take it a step further. And how does that impact us internally, the bodily cues that we could be aware of? That's like a two-part question with a really big lead up to it. I hope that makes sense.
Well, yeah, we can enter this in a number of different ways. And so if we start with the external cues, those are items that catch our attention. Something's different. All of a sudden, something's different in the lobby as you're walking in. You aren't sure what, but something got you wondering, this doesn't feel the same. So there can be visual changes to your environment. It could be the color of the wall. It could be, my boss isn't where he normally is. Why is my boss standing here with these two other people and they're looking at me? Is there something I should know? So again, it's visual clues that something's different. For some people, they might not even notice it. It doesn't mean that something different causes a change, but it's becoming aware of your environment, becoming aware of what's normal and when something's different. So the office environment is the one that's easier because it becomes familiar. You don't have control over the office environment about who sits in a particular spot. Whereas at home, I was in a relationship once where I would come home and I wouldn't know where the furniture would be because my partner loved rearranging and did it for anxiety purposes. They just felt good about moving things around. So that meant I got acclimated to, I wouldn't know what I would see going into that room, but that became the normal. But in the office, you've got an expectation. When I sit at my desk, this is how I left it when I went home last night, should be the same today, but all of a sudden it's all different. Well, the cleaning crew may have come in and moved things around, or maybe the IRS came in and was auditing your desk. What your mind goes to try to explain the differences can contribute to what your sense of comfort or discomfort is with these different visuals. Another external is, Lee, could you come into my office in 10 minutes? I want to talk to you. We didn't have anything planned, but I'm being called into the office all of a sudden. What's up? That's not normal. I don't get called in. All of a sudden, my mind's going to go into different places, and each of us is different with where we go with those thoughts. So that's where the external can come into play, and is what we'll be talking about how to watch for or notice change. That's initially where I was going. Am I going down the right path?
I think so. I
Okay.
think some of the other things that might even be more relevant now are like temperature checks. Like that would be an external, or some people the entryway is different, or kind of like you said, things might be different colors, or maybe you can only go in one door now because we're trying to keep the traffic flow a certain way. All these things that, yeah, we're not comfortable with because we're not used to that. And so I think that's a good point, that being aware, okay, I'm going to have to be comfortable with this,
I went to the store this morning, to the supermarket. I wanted to make bread and I needed to get some yeast. So I went there quickly, and there was this table for COVID, and the people were lined up and they were in the entrance. And I started wondering, am I supposed to go here? What's going on? Is the store even open? As I walked past everybody, uncertain. It just changed the nature. It took me off of the path that I was on to being distracted. So change has that element. It causes us to have to include something else in our thinking.
And so I feel like it's kind of a chain reaction. It's typically something externally. I think that we all have kind of a voice in our head that can cause some internal, bodily cues as well. But so moving from external to internal cues, what should people be aware of to understand, am I just experiencing anxiety? Am I nervous? Because before we can tackle tools or strategies to overcome it, what are the things that people should be paying attention to, how their body reacts to these situations?
So I find, even in the way I talk, I start using similar terms in overlapping ways. So I'm going to start first by differentiating two terms that are commonly used. Is how are you feeling? That is a way of asking what is your experience, or literally what's the sensation you're feeling, or what the emotion you're feeling. So emotions and feeling are one thing. Experience is a bigger conversation. It's a bigger element. It includes what feeling do I have, but the experience includes what's my temperature, what's the blood pressure, what's the smell around me, what's the amount of light, what's the temperature, what's the group of people around me. It's expanding and taking in the entirety of the experience, not only what's going on internally within me, but how am I feeling what's going on around me, going beyond just, am I excited? Am I depressed? Am I tired? So the experience is what we're referring to in this part of the conversation. It is trying to capture the entirety of what's going on around me. A way that for people to settle into this is what's referred to as quieting your mind. That monkey chatter is another way that people speak about it, is my mind's thinking about that yeast that I want to get off of what aisle, and what else do I want to get while I'm here. And all of a sudden there's there's people here. What are, oh, there's shots. And now I'm trying to, well, why am I here? Do I want to keep going? And this, all of a sudden I'm distracted by the environment and I have to make a quick judgment. Am I okay here? Am I safe here? Is it okay to go back to where I was? And can I be back on track? So I have to make those judgments. Being present to your experience has that nature to it. It is not being indifferent to what's around you. It's being alert to what's around you and making quick judgments about it. With internal, we're trying to differentiate between safety and calmness. Safe, and I'm simplifying it, but in the safety realm, it is there a problem here? Do I need to address it in some simple way? Do I need to get to safety? Am I okay here? When we're in that mindset, we have cut out our ability to think creatively. We're not going to think of all the possible ways to get out of there. We're going to think of the one way we're going to get out of there quick if we're concerned about being unsafe. We may become more aggressive because that's the way of dealing with something that's present, but that's all simple thinking. But to be creative, we've got to make sure that we're safe and calm, and you've got to know where your experience is to get there. So when that boss calls you in, being able to take some breaths to notice where, all my blood pressure just jumped. My buttocks just clenched. How do I calm down to start thinking about, all right, what could it be? What's going on? Is it, I go down the list of my clients, the list of my projects. What have I heard him talking about in the recent weeks? What could it be? I can now go start thinking about, all right, if it's this is what I need to do. If it's about, what I haven't been doing, well, I need to prepare something quickly about what I'm doing about that. But it puts us in that mode of thinking and preparing. So internally, that's what Karen and I have talked about in the past of how do we connect with what's going on and how do we get to this point where we can be productive and creative.
And I think it's hard to, I think it's something that takes practice, right? Because you can't just say, it's like saying, well, all you have to do is exercise 3 times a week. Well, easier said than done until it becomes something that, it's not just something you tolerate, it's something that you do because it's part of your routine and you found something you enjoy. Like when people are like, stay calm, take a deep breath. Well, if you haven't practiced or prepared for these situations, I think it's sometimes easy to forget to practice it because you go and you have some sort of interaction at a store. And I've heard of a lot of interactions. I've even experienced one where people are simply reacting there. And everybody's uptight. Everybody's having these feelings. Is that person wearing a mask? They should be wearing a mask. I think they should be wearing, my mask is on, right? Like, it's almost like that bad dream when you think you're in public and you don't have pants on, but now it's like, oh my gosh, I forgot my mask.
You're not worried about your pants anymore?
No, I got the pants thing down. I prepared, I practiced. So I think it's what I think is important also is, we want to be in control of ourselves. I think that being aware of how others are acting around us and not forcing a reaction out of us. How do you have some tips for people on that? Because I think in a grocery store for example, someone's going down the aisle the wrong way. Well, yeah, my uncle commented to someone about that once and that person told him to F off. And then next thing you know, it's, you're having a fight in front of the yeast instead of actually finding what you want. So I think there's a balance between, learning how to prepare for these situations when you're not in them, because it's hard. You're not feeling that heartbeat, that, shortness of breath, and our shoulders, we clench up like this. How can people practice not reacting, kind of proactive versus reactive for these situations?
So I'm going to stick with that a little bit, Karen, before I answer your question. Is we're talking about preparation. The reason to prepare is to minimize the restriction that comes from being anxious. People who are depressed, people who have PTSD, people who are anxious about what's coming, they don't have a clue about what could happen. They are limited with the experience that's right now, and there's no way out. So the ability to overcome that is about preparing. And I'm going to take us back to the basketball court. Back in my high school years, was playing organized basketball, and we had to learn about zone, learn man-to-man. We had to face those different possibilities on the court. And when you had the ball in your hand, what were you going to do? You needed to know what to handle. And the person who was prepared would then be the calm person with the ball. And they would be unfazed about, all right, this person's not coming this way. That means this. Here's what I'm going to do. In our current day life, going to the office, being called in by the boss, the same thing can happen. Is what's the worst that can happen here? What I can go through a list of possibilities and quickly do some preparation. But before we get to the office, in a safer environment, we can get a piece of paper, as I did for today's talk, to write down what am I anticipating us to talking about? What could I want to express, and where could this go? So that depending on what Karen would ask or where our conversation would go, I would already have confidence in, here are some points that I want to make sure we capture. We've talked about noticing what's going on with us. You've heard that. I would be shocked if there's anybody on this webinar that has not heard that before. But each of us practices it differently. I now wake up in the morning, and this morning I spent 30 minutes on my meditation pad. It is now my normal to wake up and just go and do that. And it's my opportunity to just listen to where I am now. I have learned I am not going to be quiet when I'm sitting on that stool. My mind's going to go about, what am I planning for today? What has happened yesterday? And then I come back to where I'm breathing. That's where you have to practice and notice what you will get. Notice that I can now notice when my heart rate's moving. I now pay attention to, does my breath go down into my belly? Those are things that until you purposely focus on it, you won't have an opportunity to use them as levers for yourself or signals that something's happening. When you get to that level of noticing, I'm getting irritated with that guy walking towards me because he came in the wrong way in this row, you get to see, all right, do I really want to have a fight right now? Because I'm gearing myself up for a fight. Have I thought about, if I get into that circumstance, am I going to let my emotions react and respond? And that's where you get road rage. That's where you get, it's probably cart rage now, that you don't want to just, I'll bump into them and act like I didn't, oh, sorry. Do you want to let that happen, or let them do what they're doing? How do I move to my safety, and what are my choices? So you can think about, well, if they do that, I'll just pull myself over and let them walk past. And if they're standing there, I'll step back and let them know I'm waiting, or I'll say, excuse me, and I'll move quickly past them. You can have different strategies. That gives you resiliency. That gives you capacity to deal with the unexpected or the changes, because you've thought a little bit about, when I meet that person in the aisle, what are my choices? When my boss calls me in, what are my choices to be defensive and express everything, or walk in there knowing there's some possibilities. Let's wait and see what he has to say, and let that be spoken to me first. And then I know I'm responding. I can't tell you the number of times in my history where I walked in there and I revealed something that they weren't even going to talk to me about, but all of a sudden we were talking about that issue that wouldn't have been noticed, but it was noticed because I was nervous that they knew, and so I was going to get in front of it. I'm not advocating that you hide stuff. I'm not using that example for that purpose, but it is a way that your anxiety can cause an outcome that might not have had to be dealt with if I was patient and wanting to hear what is actually was going on. So go ahead.
That's great. So how can people work on their, we have a really good question because, how can you realize you're getting anxious for events that come out of the blue? Because I think that's the hardest part. We can prepare for a lot, or we can understand we've been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and we know there are things, but I think especially in today's world, things escalate so quickly that we're just, it almost doesn't matter how prepared you are. So how can we understand like what's happening to us um before it's too late?
Well, so number one,
And actually, sorry to cut you off, but like, even if we don't react, but we know it's hurting, I'm adding this on myself, like even if it doesn't cause an actual reaction from us, but like it's still damaging us because our body is in that fight or flight, and it comes on like that when we least expect it. Sorry, go
so
ahead.
it in this, I feel that part of what we are grappling with these days is the assumption that there's an answer, that there is a single way, a single result, a single truth. And when we face something unexpected, we're seeking that singularity and figuring that is what's necessary versus let's find a path that will work right now. But to get to the possibilities, you need to be able to access that creative part of your thinking. The recognizing the anxiety is the practice that prepares you for the unexpected, the circumstance that there is, you never, I'm trying to think of, so I don't have a recent example, so I'm not going to go there, but in the question, you've been presented with an event that just came out of the blue, no anticipation. Well, if you trust yourself, you know that you'll be able to figure out, or you'll be able to connect with somebody that helps you get to a good solution. And if there's nobody that you can get to, it's what can I trust in this moment? This is coming on in this unexpected way. They might expect me to have the answer, but look, I'm just going to say I don't have the answer, but I'm going to do the best that I can here. It is allowing yourself to not get caught up in, I don't have the answer. I can't, I'm going to fail the test. That's a part of the anxiety. I can't succeed here because I don't know the answer. When in fact, the assessment is, the experience is, all right, this just came out of the blue. I don't know. Let's learn more. What's the next thing I can do here? What can I offer in this moment? And I will do my best and to know yourself well enough to say, look, I can't do anything here now. Sorry, I just learned this. I need some time. You may say, I need to get myself to some safety, and that might be the appropriate action. So it could take in any of those different directions. It starts with your being aware of who you are, what you're comfortable with, what you're confident in, and learning to build that trust. That's an intellectual idea. You can't get from the intellectual idea to using it without using it. It is, great. So I did this. I still have to be in a webinar and practice and learn how to deliver. And this is not my first webinar, but it's not going to be my last, and I will improve from each one. So it's in the question of the unexpected, expect the unexpected and give yourself permission to be honest with yourself about, can you deal with this in this moment? Do you need to get yourself to a spot that gives you time to think about it? And there might be consequences. It's not to say that any action that I take won't have consequences, but the starting point is, am I honoring and recognizing what and where I am first, my safety first, my productivity second, and trusting myself is embedded in all of that. But it is good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Okay, so I want to first of all thank you for carrying that conversation while I figured this out. One of the things that I thought, actually, Sean, your question was kind of a good segue for this, but focusing on joy over dread. So we dread certain situations. People may dread going back to work. People may dread knowing that they're staying at home. What are some things that we can do with others, like even to touch upon Pam's comments, like just kind of reminding yourself that everybody's human. People may be having a bad day. So we're aware of other people, but how can we try to focus on joy? And especially where this is kind of a work environment thing, what are some tips for employers to put into place that could help their employees, and how can employees even potentially make going back to work or working remotely a little bit more joyful instead of dreadful?
Wow, that's a biggie. It covers a lot of territory. Let's start with at the individual level, the joy versus the dread, or I consider the weight versus the expansion. Feeling joyful oftentimes gets somebody to stand taller, to feel like they could bounce on their toes, whereas something that is arduous or dread is more like carrying a weight on your shoulder and then you're trying to bear something. And that is a characteristic similar to what we talk about the flight and fright reaction. It shuts you down. Something that is arduous and um, weighty is going to, it doesn't take you into your creative area. You have to be conscious about, all right, I'm not liking what's coming up. How do I strategize around that to get the best out of it when it's coming? Sort of bring myself closer or in the direction of being lighter or more joyful. So tactically, moving towards joy is the ideal strategy for being able to operate at your best. If you're feeling dread about what you're going to do, you've closed down the possibilities. You've determined the outcome is not going to be good. You have limited your options. So at the individual level, that's the rationale around the joy and dread, what you want to, why they're important. Now, when you start working within your environment with the task or other, it's always looking for, all right, I've got this task to do and I don't like it. How do I shift it or work with it in a way that makes it a little more tolerable? Maybe it's bringing somebody else in. Maybe it is setting it aside, or it's promising myself I will go do something afterwards just to get through it. So individually, those are still things I can do. From a business standpoint, from a manager standpoint, from an environment standpoint, having the opportunity to give individuals time to speak what's on their mind can offload the burden they're bringing into the office. I'm worried about my dad because he just went to the hospital to get tested. As you walk into the building, your mind might be there and you're burdened by that. If there's no opportunity to speak it, you'll be asked to stuff it and try to operate on top of that. Well, we're good with compartmentalization, but your body has absorbed that feeling and it actually is restricting you without you necessarily noticing it. It's taking a little bit away from your mind as well. So having an environment that gives room for conversations about where people are. It's not to agree with them. It's not to affirm them. It is to give opportunity for it to be spoken and respect for that's what's going on with that person. It gives me room to come in here and say, I'm worried about that. thanks. You guys know, but I don't want you to worry about it. I'll work on my work, but I'm not hiding that anymore. So it leaves room for more creative, more productive interaction. The key is having an environment that understands somebody voicing it does not mean that I certify what they say, that I agree what they say. Doesn't mean that when I speak it, I want you to agree with me that what I'm saying is right. I'm just expressing what my experience is here for purposes of me being able to be present in the job at this moment. So in dealing with the environment, if you can do that with your colleagues, you can create a nice work environment just among yourself. If you're a manager trying to set up time with your team to have moments where they can express that at the outset of a meeting, everybody 30 seconds quickly, where are you? Without judgment, without ridicule, without repercussion, for purposes of we want to be productive here and keep it concise, is a way that a manager can deal with it. And organizationally is managing your managers to incorporate this lifestyle and having that work. So there's different layers that you can address it.
I think the only exception is that my husband knows I'm always right.
And again, I hear what you say, Karen.
I think, for me, one thing that I learned, I don't know how long ago, but I found it really helpful because I feel like throughout our day, like no matter how prepared we are, like that question, these things escalate and we don't realize we're internalizing it. But I've learned to think that like by default, everybody is good. So whether we're going to work or we're going to the grocery store, people are human and they have bad days. It doesn't make them a bad person. Deep down, everybody is a good person. And just because someone cut you off and you want to flip them off and pass them and whatever it is, just kind of what's helped me is to be like, okay, everybody is a good person. Nobody really, okay, I won't say nobody, but most people wake up and they don't want to do bad things or make other people feel ashamed of themselves or that they've done something wrong. But I think that we internalize so much. And so there's that where it's like, well, they did this to me, so they must not like me. And then that kind of drives the inner voice. And I want to tie this together because people that are on this call were on another call we did a couple months ago about digging deep. And it was more kind of athletic based, where it was like, I'm climbing up a hill and it's really hard. And this voice in my head is telling me I can't do it. And you've got to like give it a name and a personality and say, shut up, Betty. And that's the example that we used. And so I feel like those are the two things that have helped me. And you can say if that's a good strategy for people or not, because something different is going to work for different people. But for me, it's like, okay, everybody has good intentions, but everybody makes mistakes. I've cut people off, I think, but I didn't mean, you don't mean to. And, just kind of saying, okay, quiet. You're in the back of the bus. I'm the one driving the bus. You're not driving the bus. You're just the noisy kid in the back. Those are some strategies that have helped me. And I'd love your take on that or anything else like that.
So I don't use Betty, and it's probably politically correct not to. But what I have learned, how I've associated with what you're talking about, Karen, is when I get anxious, when I am irritated or upset, and anxiety is really where we started this whole conversation, the fear that can come with the potential of infection or however people relate to it. I'm 64 years old now, but I still have that child from my single digits or adolescent years inside of me. I have my imagery is I'm giving a hug to that child, like my children. I'm giving myself a hug saying, I got you, Lee. I got you, little Lee. You go off and to the playground, you play and have fun. Adult Lee's here. I'll take care of it. It's another way of calming down and taking care of the part of me that's anxious to put in a safe spot and bringing forward the person that I am today, which is a reminder that I have some knowledge, I have some wisdom, I have some tactics that I can use here. And I'm more equipped than my adolescent self was.
Great point.
So that's a way of framing that anxiety as a part of me that I can have still be with me. You can go off here and be there. I got this. I'll take care of you. And then I can face what's in front of me. And it's not to mean that it's going to turn out okay. It just means that I'm going to be present in the conversation and make some choices from a grounded space. But you got to practice it. If you don't put yourself in position to practice it, you'll think after you walk out of the store, oh, I could have done that. Why did I get into that? Why did I have to stay on their bumper, after they irritated me? It's about being conscious of ourselves. When that boss calls you in, to be able to walk in there and just say, hey, what's up? And wait to hear, not act on what you think it is. So
don't worry about what hasn't happened yet, right? Waste that time. That's great.
Well, Karen.
Yeah.
Plan for what you anticipate happening.
Right.
Still possibilities, but then let it happen. See what it actually is going to be. And then you've got something to pick from.
Good. I like that, because it's not just letting it go, but still preparing. It's kind of that fine line between preparing and worrying too much. Good stuff. I know that we are kind of winding down on time. And the one last thing that I wanted to kind of point out to people, because we are both coaches. And so we help people with things that they're going through or their goals. But, where can people find support? Because ultimately these are areas that people, I think the harder the challenge, the more support you need. And it's hard sometimes to take that look at yourself and realize, well, when is this getting out of hand? When is this, is this escalating? And so, I guess just from a support standpoint, I wanted to make sure people are understanding like where they can find help or how to, change their environment. Like, is it something that HR directors can help with by offering like, hey, we've got calls at this time, or I don't know if I'm being clear with the question, but support for people with anxiety and handling these situations.
There are different levels of significance around anxiety, and each person needs to judge where they are. So the reason I'm coaching is that I deal with who the person is today and how do we operate as you are today with the choices that you face. We're not waiting for that childhood trauma to be resolved, or I got yelled at by so-and-so in English class and I've never gotten over it. I'm not waiting to resolve that. It's how do we use that in preparing that presentation today? And what are the clues for that? But there are circumstances where somebody is showing depressive behaviors and activities. That's when you want to see a psychologist or psychiatrist for delving into the underlying and determining, is this a chemical thing? Because there is some anxiety that gets to a level where it's a physical manifestation that can be supported through medication. And that can be temporary, or it might actually be something that is chronic that you benefit by having there on a regular basis. And it puts you in a better position to have a life that you want. The resources that work is having, determining, can you have conversations with your manager at a honest level? They are not your psychologist, they are not your psychiatrist, they are not your social worker, but cluing them in on, here's some big things that are going on at home that I'm paying attention. Here's some strategies I have around it, or can you suggest some strategies of how do I handle my work while I also do this? and, to have room to have that. If you don't have that relationship with your manager, determine, can you do that with your HR folks? Do they have the opportunity to do that? Outside of that, seek groups outside of work that are for this purpose, where they get together on a particular topic. I was in a project management institute organization outside of work that other project managers would get to talk about, agile versus waterfall. What a pain in the butt. Why do we want to move there? And the evolution. You get to address the issues that are relevant to your industry, but it could also be working moms, or you pick your combination, seek another group of people. If you're reticent about any of those, journal, write things down, move it out of up here. If you're processing something solely in your mind, it will always look more precise than it really is in reality. If you put it on paper, you'll start seeing what you really don't know about that, or what's not quite as clean. It's remarkable, just taking 5-10 minutes in the morning to do that stream of thought writing will bring forward some ideas that were blocked because you were leaving other ones in your mind and you weren't getting to the ones that could be helpful. Physical exercise, taking care of your body and moving your muscles at a point that gives them some exhaustion, is another way of releasing things from the body, because they are I'm going to use an analogy, and I don't know how apt it is, but I'm going to call our muscles the original clouds. We have data clouds right now. Our phones and information are in this proverbial cloud that we don't see. We know that there's engineering out there somewhere. Our muscles store our feelings and our experiences. If we move them, if we exhaust them, it's a way of releasing some of that. So that's another way to address it. There's more, but that's.
No, I think that's great. I think I liked what you said about, maybe it's medication, or, depending on obviously the intensity of your symptoms and seeing a doctor. But one thing that you said that stuck out was it could be just a temporary solution. And I think that's great, because sometimes we have this thought that we have to just stay on something forever, or we have to, continually progress at a rate that doesn't seem realistic to us. So I really liked that. And I think journaling is great too. It's a great way to, like you said, make some room for other thoughts, for the happy thoughts. So I know we're kind of running out of time here. I do want to thank everybody for joining us. And if you have questions, you can reach out to me. I can connect you to Lee directly if you have questions specific for him. I think this was great. And Lee, do you have any last things you want to say?
Well, I love the conversation, and you and I were the ones that had the conversation. I always want to include other people because there's other perspectives to have, but this supports me in putting together thoughts and perspectives about what change is. And just to try to put a cherry on top, this past year has benefited everybody because the amplitude of the change was unavoidable. Everybody was affected. Everybody got to feel a stress, a reaction to it. It has always, in our lives in the last 10, 15 years, we have been operating above a line of calm. And that became a new normal without us knowing it. This has just pushed it up that much higher, and being able to come back to your breath, come back to calm, find something to be bored about is important for your body. It's important for your health. It's important for your job. If you're going from your job to get the kids to practice, to make dinner, to then do the work you didn't get done before, and roll into bed to roll out 5 hours later, your body has never been given the opportunity to rest sufficiently. And if you aren't taking care of your body, your um, liquids, your health, you can't be productive long term. You're going to crash and your productivity is going to go down and your opportunities to achieve what you want will be harder. So find ways to build this in and you'll find you'll roll with changes far easier as well.
Yeah, good stuff. Um, if anybody else has any last minute questions, feel free to type them in chat. But otherwise, again, I want to, thank everybody for taking the time to join us. I'm just scrolling through to make sure we didn't miss anything with our little technology blip here. And thank you, Lee, for spending the hour. I think that, there's some really good tips here and strategies for people to try. And, we can always kind of regroup and even focus in on one more specific topic if that's what people want, if you guys have suggestions or questions. But I'd say we're good for now. That was a full hour. Thank you guys. Thank you, Lee.
You're
And
welcome.
I hope everybody has an awesome rest of their day.